The giant cowboy vowed to the girl with no shoes, "By spring you'll carry my bloodline." The road that cut through the edge of the valley was dry and pale, like it had forgotten what rain felt like. Dust lifted with every step, hanging in the air before settling back down. Most people avoided that road in winter. The wind was sharp, the ground hard, and nothing waited there except silence. But almost every morning, a girl walked it anyway. She was small for her age, thin in a way that came from missed meals, not choice. Her dress was too light for the cold, and her feet were bare. The stones bit into her skin, but she never cried out. She walked with her eyes forward, as if stopping would make things worse. No one knew exactly where she came from. Some said her family moved on. Others said they were gone for good. The truth was simple. She had nowhere else to go. At the far end of the road stood an old ranch. The fences leaned, the barn paint had faded, and the land looked tired. Still, the place held together, much like the man who owned it. He was known as the Giant Cowboy, not because he wanted the name, but because people gave it to him without asking. He was tall, broad, and moved slowly like someone who knew his own strength and respected it. That morning he stood near the fence fixing a broken post. His hands were rough, marked by years of work, and the cold did not seem to bother him. He worked in silence, the only sound the scrape of metal in the low wind. At first he thought it was an animal. Then he saw the shape clearly, a child, walking alone. He straightened and watched as she came closer. Her steps were careful, her arms pulled tight around herself. When he saw her feet, his hands stilled. He had lived through hard times. He knew poverty. But seeing bare feet on frozen ground made something twist in his chest. She did not look at him right away. She kept walking, as if the ranch was just another thing to pass. When she was only a few steps away, he spoke. "Hey," he said, his voice low and unused. She stopped so fast it was like she had run into a wall. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes were large and cautious, the kind that had learned not to trust quickly. "I won't hurt you," he said, realizing how big he must look to her. He stepped back, giving space. "You're going to freeze walking like that." "I'm used to it," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. That surprised him more than anything. "Where are your shoes?" he asked. She shrugged. Didn't have any. The answer was simple, too simple. He nodded, unsure what to say next. He wasn't good with words. He was better with fences, animals, and long days that ended without conversation. "You hungry?" he asked after a moment. She hesitated. Pride flickered across her face, then faded. A little. He opened the gate and pointed toward the house. "I've got bread and soup. Nothing fancy." She stayed where she was, eyes scanning the yard, like she expected someone to shout at her for being there. "You can leave after," he added. "No strings." Slowly, she stepped through the gate. Inside the house, the air was warmer. The place was plain but clean. A fire burned low in the stove. He set a bowl of soup on the table and watched as she ate carefully, like she wanted to make it last. He placed a pair of old boots near her chair. Too big, worn, but solid. "For now," he said. She looked at them like they were something fragile. "Thank you." When she finished, she stood, wiping her hands on her dress. "I should go." "Storm's coming." She shook her head. "I always walk it." He saw more than hunger. He saw stubborn strength, the kind that comes from surviving without help. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused. "People used to call me Lila." "Used to? No one asks anymore." "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I'm called Hank." She nodded once, committing it to memory. When she left wearing the boots, he watched from the porch as she disappeared down the road. Snow began to fall soon after. Days passed, then more, and still she came back. Sometimes for food, sometimes just to sit near the fire and warm her hands. She never asked for much. He never asked too many questions. They learned each other slowly, like careful steps across thin ice. The town noticed, of course. People always did. "That cowboy's gone soft," someone said at the store. "What's he doing with that girl?" Another whispered. Hank heard none of it directly, but he felt the weight of eyes when he rode into town. He ignored them. He had lived alone long enough to know other people's opinions did not fix broken things. One evening, as winter began to loosen its grip, Lila stood at the door, looking out at the fields. "Spring feels far away," she said. "It always does," Hank replied. She looked up at him. "Do things really change when it comes?" He thought of his land, his past, the name that would end with him. He thought of her walking barefoot through cold mornings. "They can," he said, if someone works for it. Outside, the snow melted slowly, fading the ground. Inside, something else began to take shape. Not loud, not sudden, but real. A connection built on patience, not promises. And though neither of them said it out loud, both felt that the road she walked might not always be hers to walk alone. That was how it began. Not with grand words, but with soup, boots, and a door left open when the world outside felt closed. Winter did not leave all at once. It pulled back slowly, like it was unsure whether to go. The mornings were still cold, but the lights stayed longer now. Hank noticed the change in the land before anything else. The soil softened. The animals moved with more energy, and inside his chest, something long buried began to stir. He had not planned for Lila to become part of his days. It happened the way real things do, quietly, without asking. She came most mornings now, always before the sun climbed too high. Sometimes she helped feed the chickens. Sometimes she just sat near the fence, watching the fields like she was learning their language. Hank watched her too, though he pretended not to. He noticed how she never wasted a movement, how she listened more than she spoke. She carried herself like someone much older, but sometimes, when she laughed at something small, the weight fell away, and she looked like a child again. That made him uncomfortable in a way he could not explain. At night, when the house was quiet, memories came back to him. He had spent years pushing them aside, but now they rose like smoke from old embers. He remembered his father, a tall man with tired eyes, who believed land was a promise you had to keep. He remembered his mother, who taught him that a name meant nothing unless it stood for something. Their name had once mattered in the valley. It had stood for honesty, hard work, and keeping your word. But time wore it down, and his parents passed, one after the other. The land almost went with them. Hank stayed not because he had hope, but because he did not know how to leave. People thought bloodline meant children, faces that looked like yours, a future written in birth. Hank had learned the hard way that it was more than that. A bloodline was a chain of values. When it broke, nothing followed. That was why Lila unsettled him. One evening, as the wind pressed against the house, she sat at the table reading from an old book. Her lips moved slowly as she sounded out each word. Hank leaned against the wall, pretending to fix something that did not need fixing. "You're getting better," he said. She looked up, surprised. Praise was still new to her. "I mess up a lot." "So did I," he replied. "Still do." She smiled at that, then went back to reading. Later, as he poured water into the kettle, she spoke again. "Why do people stare when I'm in town with you?" Hank paused. He had hoped she wouldn't notice. "People talk," he said carefully. "They always do. About things they don't understand." She considered this. "Do you care?" "No." That was not entirely true. He cared a little, just not enough to let it change what he did. The next day, a man from the town council came by. He stood stiffly near the porch, glancing around like he was afraid the land itself might speak. "People are asking questions," the man said. Hank crossed his arms. "About what?" "About the girl." "She's not doing anything wrong." The man cleared his throat. "They say you made some kind of vow." "I made no vow out loud." "But you said something," the man insisted. "Something about spring?" Words had been twisted, pulled out of shape. "I said by spring she'd carry my bloodline," Hank said calmly. The man stiffened. "You can't say things like that." "And I did." The man left soon after, shaking his head. That night, Lila stood by the fire, hugging her arms. "Are you in trouble?" "No," Hank said. "Because of me?" He met her eyes. "Never because of you." She hesitated. "About spring." Hank sat down heavily, like the question had weight. "It doesn't mean what they think," he said. "It means you won't be alone anymore. It means you'll carry something forward. Strength, values, a future." She watched him closely. "You mean like a family name?" "Yes," he said. "But more than that." She was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, "Do I have to?" "No," he said immediately. "Nothing I give comes with chains." Relief softened her shoulders. Winter faded further. Hank began teaching her more than chores. He showed her how to track weather by the sky, how to mend tools, how to stand your ground without raising your voice. She listened, practiced, failed, and tried again. He never rushed her. In return, she asked him questions he had avoided for years. Why he never went to town celebrations, why he kept his parents' room untouched, why he looked sad when he thought no one noticed. He did not answer all of them, but sometimes he did. One afternoon, as they worked the fence, Lila slipped and scraped her hand. Hank moved fast, wrapping it gently, his large fingers careful. You don't have to be so gentle, she said. I do, he replied. Power without care is just harm. She remembered that. The land began to change color. Green pushed through brown. The air smelled different, alive. Spring was close now, and with it came choice. Hank knew that soon someone would force the question again. The town would want answers. So would Lila. A bloodline once spoken could not remain only a thought. He looked at the ranch, the girl reading on the porch, the boots now worn into her steps. For the first time in years, he did not feel like the end of something. Spring arrived quietly, almost shyly, like it did not want to interrupt anything. One morning, Hank opened the door and smelled wet earth instead of frost. The sky was pale blue, and the fields looked softer, like they had finally taken a deep breath. Lila stood on the porch, her boots dusty, her hair tied back with a simple string. It feels different, she said. Hank nodded. It is. Days grew longer, and with them came more work. The land asked for attention, and Hank answered it like he always had. What changed was that he no longer worked alone. Lila followed him everywhere, carrying small tools, asking questions, watching closely. She learned fast, not because she was told to, but because she wanted to. He showed her how to plant seeds, how deep was too deep, how patience mattered more than force. He explained that the ground remembered how it was treated. If you rushed it, it resisted. If you respected it, it gave back. People are like that too, she said once. Hank smiled. You're catching on. Some afternoons, they worked in silence. Other times, she filled the air with questions. She asked about the stars, about animals, about why some people left and never came back. Hank answered what he could. When he did not know, he said so. That honesty mattered to her. The town noticed the changes at the ranch. The fence stood straighter, the fields looked cared for again. And Leela no longer walked the road barefoot. She walked beside Hank when they went into town. Her head held high, though her eyes stayed alert. People whispered less now, but their looks lingered. Some were curious. Some were unsure. A few were kind. At the store, an older woman pressed a loaf of bread into Lila's hands. For growing days, she said softly. Lila thanked her, surprised. When they stepped outside, she looked up at Hank. Why was she nice? Because sometimes, he said, people remember who they used to be. Not everyone softened, though. One afternoon, a group of men stood near the edge of the ranch, watching. Hank felt their eyes before he saw them. He kept working, but his shoulders tensed. Lila noticed. Are they angry? Just afraid of what they don't understand. Should we be afraid too? He looked at her. No. Still, that night, he slept lighter than usual. Spring brought storms. Heavy rain turned the road to mud and the fields into mirrors. One evening, thunder rolled so loud the walls seemed to shake. Lila sat by the fire, knees drawn up, listening. I don't like storms, she admitted. Hank added another log to the fire. They pass. What if they don't? They always do, he said, then paused. But sometimes they change things first. When it finally stopped, part of the lower fence had collapsed. Hank went out early to fix it. Lila followed, slipping once in the mud. Stay back, he said gently. I can help. He looked at her, then handed her a rope. All right, but carefully. They worked side by side, hands dirty, clothes soaked. When it was done, they stood looking at their work. It wasn't perfect, but it held. You did good, Hank said. Her face lit up. I did? Yes. Moments like that mattered more than either of them said. As weeks passed, Hank began teaching her things that were not written down anywhere. How to know when someone was lying without needing proof. How to listen more than you speak. How to walk away from fights that were not yours. He told her that strength was not loud, and power did not need an audience. She listened, storing the lessons carefully, like seeds waiting for the right time. In return, she changed him in ways he did not expect. She asked him to join her at the table instead of eating alone. She laughed at his dry jokes. She reminded him of small joys, like warm bread and evening light. One afternoon they sat on the porch watching the sun sink low. Lila broke the silence. Do you ever regret staying here? Hank thought about it. Sometimes, he said honestly, but less now. Because of me? Because of what we're building. She nodded, satisfied. The question he feared finally came one quiet evening. Lila stood near the fence, staring at the road she used to walk alone. If spring is here, she said slowly, what happens now? Hank joined her. What do you want to happen? She hesitated. I want to belong somewhere, but I don't want to feel trapped. You won't, he said firmly. How do you know? "Because I won't let that happen," he replied, "and neither will you." She studied his face, searching for doubt. She found none. "I want to stay," she said, "if that's allowed." Hank swallowed. "It is." The land continued to grow. Crops pushed up through soil. Birds returned. Life moved forward, steady and real, but not everything was settled. Town council called another meeting. Papers were mentioned. Questions about guardianship and responsibility hovered in the air. Hank knew challenges were coming. Spring did not erase problems, it only brought them into the light. That night, he sat alone at the table staring at his parents' old papers. The name at the top felt heavy. He thought about what it meant now. Lila stood in the doorway, watching him. "You look worried." "I'm thinking," he said. "About me?" "Yours. This place." She walked closer. "I trust you." Trust was not something he demanded. It was something you earned every day. Outside, the wind moved gently through the fields. The road lay quiet, no longer a path of survival, but a reminder of where she had come from. Spring showed its harder side just when everything seemed steady. The grass was green, the crops were growing, and the ranch looked more alive than it had in years. But change never comes alone. It brings questions, and questions bring pressure. The first letter arrived on a quiet morning. Hank found it nailed to the fence post near the road. The paper was official, stiff, and cold to the touch. He read it once, then again, his jaw tightening. It spoke of land records, responsibility, and concerns raised by the town. It did not accuse him directly, but the meaning was clear. People were watching. Decisions were coming. Lila noticed his mood right away. He was quieter that day, his movements heavier. "What's wrong?" she asked as they fed the animals. "Just town business," he said. She did not push, but the worry stayed in her eyes. A few days later, Hank rode into town for the meeting. Lila stayed behind, sitting on the porch, watching the road like she used to. But this time, not because she had nowhere else to go. She waited, because she cared. The meeting room was small and crowded. The same faces that once ignored Hank now studied him closely. Papers were passed around. Words like future, stability, and proper arrangements filled the air. One man spoke plainly. "You've taken responsibility for a child. The town needs to know your intentions." Hank stood. His sighs filled the room, but his voice stayed calm. "My intention is simple. She's safe. She's cared for. She belongs where she is. And legally?" another asked. "I'll do whatever needs to be done," Hank replied, "but I won't send her away to make others comfortable." Others frowned. The meeting ended without a clear answer. Hank rode home under a sky that had darkened with clouds. He felt the old fear creeping back, the fear of losing what little he had built. At the ranch, Lila met him halfway down the drive. "Well?" she asked. "Nothing decided yet?" he said. She nodded, then surprised him by saying, "If I have to leave, I understand." "That's not happening." "You don't know that," she said softly. "Things don't always work out. Listen to me. Whatever comes, you'll have a choice. I promise." She searched his face. "You promised before," that night. A storm rolled in, fast and loud. Rain slammed against the roof. Thunder cracked close enough to shake the windows. Lila sat awake, staring at the wall. Hank noticed and brought her a blanket. "Storms still scare you?" he asked. She nodded. "They remind me how fast things can fall apart." He sat nearby, not touching, just present. "This place has seen worse than storms," he said, "and it's still standing." A fence line gave way again, worse than before. A portion of the field flooded, threatening the young crops. Hank worked from sunrise to dark, muscles aching. Lila helped where she could, carrying tools, holding boards steady, refusing to be sent inside. At one point, she slipped and fell hard into the mud. Hank rushed to her side. "I'm okay," she said quickly, even as tears filled her eyes. "You don't have to prove anything." "I know," she said, "but I want to." The town sent another message, this time clearer. A final review was coming. They wanted plans in writing, proof of stability, proof of intent. Hank sat at the table late into the night, writing slowly, carefully. He wrote about the land, the work, the values he lived by. He wrote about teaching, not owning, about guiding, not controlling. He did not write about fear. Lila watched from the doorway. "You could let me go," she said quietly. "It would be easier." He did not look up. Easier doesn't mean right. She stepped closer. "What if staying costs you everything?" He finally met her eyes. "Then it costs me everything." She had never heard anyone speak like that about her. The day of the final decision arrived bright and clear. almost unfairly beautiful. Hank and Leela walked into town together. Whispers followed them, but no one stopped them. This time Lila was allowed to speak. She stood small but steady in the center of the room. "I wasn't safe before," she said simply. "Here I am. I learn. I work. I'm not afraid to sleep at night." Silence filled the room. "I don't need much," she added. "Just a place where I'm wanted." Hank felt something tighten in his chest. The council spoke quietly among themselves. Then the oldest member stood. "This isn't about blood," he said slowly. "It's about responsibility." He looked at Hank. "Are you prepared for the long road?" "I've been walking it my whole life." The decision was not perfect. There were rules, check-ins, expectations, but there was also approval, permission, a future that did not end in separation. When they stepped back outside, Lila let out a breath she'd been holding for months. "So," she said, trying to sound casual, "we're still us?" Hank smiled. "A real one. We're still us." The ranch welcomed them back in silence and sun. The land did not care about papers or meetings. It responded to care, to effort, to time. That evening they sat on the porch, watching the sky turn gold. "Spring tested us," Leela said. "It's not done yet," Hank replied. She nodded. "Neither are we." The vow Hank once spoke, misunderstood, and whispered about had taken shape now, not as words, but as action. Whatever came next, it would be faced together, rooted in choice, not fear. Summer arrived the way spring never could, confident, bright, and full of movement. The land no longer hesitated. The fields stood tall, the crops thick and green, and the ranch felt steady under the sun. What once looked tired now looked awake. Lila noticed it first. "The land looks proud," she said one morning as they walked between the rows. Hank smiled. It should. So had she. She was taller now, stronger in small ways that mattered. Her steps were sure. Her voice no longer disappeared at the end of sentences. She laughed more easily, and when she worked with purpose, not fear. The town visits became routine. Not friendly, not cold, just normal. People nodded now instead of staring. Some even waved. Change, Hank learned, did not need applause. It only needed time. One afternoon, a group of children passed the ranch road. Lila watched them quietly. "I used to think people like that had something I didn't," she said. "What do you think now?" Hank asked. "I think I just needed someone to see me." That stayed with him. The old house began to change too. Slowly, one room at a time. Hank finally opened his parents' room, letting air and light in. Lila helped clean, never touching anything without asking. Together, they decided what to keep and what to let go. "Does it hurt?" she asked gently. "Sometimes," he said. "But holding on forever hurts too." Books lined the walls. A desk faced the window. It felt like a place meant for growth, not memory. The summer festival came, something Hank had avoided for years. This time Lila asked if they could go. "We don't have to stay long," she said. They went. The town square was full of music, food, and noise. Lila's eyes widened at everything. Hank stayed close but did not hover. An older man approached them, someone Hank barely remembered. "You did good," the man said quietly. Hank nodded. That was enough. As the days passed, the meaning of the vow Hank once spoke became clearer, even to those who had doubted him. There was no dramatic moment, no public speech. The truth showed itself in ordinary things, in lessons taught, in choices respected, in care given without demand. One evening, Lila brought him a folded paper. "I wrote something," she said. "You don't have to read it." Later alone, he opened it. It was a list. Things I've learned here, how to stand without fear, how to work without shame, how to trust slowly, how to belong without being owned. At the bottom she had written, "This is the bloodline I carry." Hank sat for a long time after that. The end of summer brought quieter days. The heat softened. The light turned gold earlier each evening. Lila spent more time reading, planning, thinking about the future. School in town was discussed, so was choice. "You don't have to stay forever," Hank reminded her one night. "I know," she said. "That's why I want to." The day she received her official papers, nothing dramatic happened. No celebration, no tears. Just a quiet moment at the table. "It's real now," she said. "It always was," Hank replied. She smiled. "I know. But now the world knows too." That evening, they walked the old road together, the one she used to walk alone. The dust rose softly under their boots. I don't hate this road anymore, she said. You don't have to, Hank said. It did its job. At the edge of the ranch, she stopped. This is where things changed. Yes, he agreed, but not where they end. The ranch stood behind them, solid, patient, alive. Lila turned to him. You kept your vow. Hank nodded. You carried it. They walked back together, not as something saved or something owed, but as two lives connected by choice, effort, and time. The bloodline did not end with a name written on paper. It lived in values passed forward, in strength shared, in a future built without fear.